of victory and the agony of defeat.
Madison, great ball around the corner, Petticini, he beats them all! Junior Polar out wide, bumped away from Trindle, Sharks coming through, none of them can hold this!
Hello and welcome to what is hopefully a live edition of our Instant Reaction podcast. Obviously getting some gremlins sorted out here, looking at my back-end stuff here, Sixties, and it says that we're live, so if you're in the YouTube chat, yeah, there we go, I see Jared Rose saying that sucked, and Jared, you're 100% spot on. That did indeed suck, so it looks like we've got at least one commenter in the live chat. Thanks for that, Jared. But let's get to the sort of usual business before we get into a post-mortem 60s. I'm John, also known as 4020, and as you just heard, that's my mate 60s. You can also call him Craig. The Eels not doing too well for this Instant Reaction podcast, big fella. They are struggling mightily against the Melbourne Storm. So we'll get into that, into the 56-18 loss. But before we do, how you holding up, mate? Not the way we envisaged the season starting, and we knew it was going to be a challenge with the injuries and suspensions that sort of prevented us from having a full-strength lineup, but that sort of goes a couple levels beyond what we were hoping.
John, if you can hear me, I'm not getting...
You there, mate? You there, mate?
Yes, okay, I'm there. Have I missed the intro?
You have missed the intro. You've missed me rambling on about how things weren't great. So as we, like we said, we're sort of trying to get through the technical gremlins of live streaming on YouTube. So thanks for bearing with us, guys. I can see a few comments in there. There's Chanel with the hand waves. There's Chris, Michael, Mitchell Clark, big troublemaker right there. And then Andrew. Thanks everyone for stopping by. I know it's not the way we sort of hoped it would be, but Craig, how you doing, mate?
Well, I think there's better ways to start round one, isn't there, mate?
There's about 57 better ways, I reckon, you look at that scoreboard.
Yes. I mean, look, as I said to you when we were chatting before we started the podcast, I think a lot of people expected an end result like what we got. They just probably didn't expect that a lot of it would happen in the first half. And unfortunately, that's how it panned out. So, look, no Mitch Moses was one thing. 9 players unavailable for selection was another thing. The players not turning up in the first half in round one was something that none of us wanted to see.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
We have to be brutally honest that in that first half, the players, their heads weren't in the game. Now, when I say didn't turn up, I'm a lot of what we saw out there was between the ears, because there was a lot of effort plays that were missing. There was a lack of, seemed like a lack of communication, lack of football smarts. It was a lack of everything, to be honest. It was just a very, very ordinary first half. It improved a bit in the second half. There was a mixture of Melbourne maybe taking the foot off the pedal a little bit. But as I said to you as well, John, the thing about Melbourne is, and unless you've ever seen them live, you don't get a true appreciation of how they play their football. They put their foot on the accelerator right at the start, and they play a brand of football and a pace of football that is difficult to describe unless you're actually there. I mean, it looks fast on the television.
Yeah.
It is so much different there. Sometimes you watch their football live when they're really on song. You watch it live and you go, how can anyone go with this?
And there's no doubt they were turbocharged today. We saw all sorts of set pieces and not even trick plays, but just the best of sort of greatest hits from Melbourne, didn't we?
Yeah, so you've got to stay with them in that. You've got to find ways of shutting that down. Now, if you can stay with them during that period of up-tempo football, then they're prone to head towards what you saw in the second half. But the Eels didn't stay with them, and in fact just offered them possession after possession, territory. It was almost like when you watch scrimmage work at training and one team gets all the possession. It was literally like a training run in that first.
I mean, the stats now, as you tend to see, the stats sort of normalise and stabilise in the second half to even possession splits. But in the first half, it was over 60-40 in Melbourne's favour, 35 degrees conditions, on the pitch. The Eels did not do themselves any favours with the tackles and missed and the balls they dropped in the first half. And yeah, Melbourne, we knew they were going to be fired up for round one. We've got over 2 decades of evidence in the books that they're round one specialists. And I don't know what happened, 60s, but the Eels obviously got their preparation for week one wrong, because going out of the preseason, out of the trials, we accounted for Newcastle very nicely, and then against the Tigers there were some issues, but nothing that was particularly troubling. Like, it was stuff that you would clean up in the following 2 weeks. But then we just got I don't know what happened. We got it wrong. So,
well, John, if you look at the performance in that first half, and I'm going to ask you to go through some key stats in a moment, but if you look at the football in that first half, you saw when the Eels had possession, there was no attacking shape. There was nothing. There was like one-up hits. There was the defence was so atrocious. It was some of the worst defensive football that I've seen from the Eels, like in a half of football in memory. Probably that Dolphins game last year was more embarrassing, right? But in terms of what was happening in defence in that first half, you think it's a line ball. I'm looking at who was playing for the Dolphins in that game.
Yeah, the caliber opponent is actually a pretty important tiebreaker. I agree.
Yeah, and all of those Melbourne Stars were switched on in that first half. Like, it was almost like they couldn't go wrong. The ball was falling for them. They were hitting the holes at the exact moment. But when you're looking at what Parramatta was producing in contrast, as I said, you saw nothing in the way of attack. There was no structure. There was no set plays. It was just like trying to do their best to fumble their way through a set of 6. And in defence, like, it looked like 13 players who'd met each other for the first time before they ran out onto the field. Like, really, you looked at it and you thought, there's minimal line speed.
Yeah.
Some players are charging up, some are staying back. The holes were just everywhere, and you felt like Melbourne could score on every possession, and they damn near almost did. That was the point. So, look, I've been bombarded by messages through that game, as you can well imagine, John,
including myself. I think.
Yeah.
The old gun to the head emoji while crying, laughing at one point. It was that kind of first half.
Yeah, and to the people that ring me during the games, just know I don't answer anyone's calls during the game. If I was answering calls, I wouldn't get to watch the game. So the phone goes onto silent, and then normally I just check in with John around half time about what's happened during the first half. But John, it was just the messages that I was getting about what the Eels were producing, and what on earth has happened in the pre-season. This is nothing like what you reported in the pre-season. No, it wasn't.
No, it
wasn't, because there was nothing that the Eels did. Now, that goes without saying in terms of when you're talking about how a team prepares in the pre-season, they're running against each other. And, of course, the real test comes when you start running against opponents. However, you saw the different structures and play and the speed of the ball that the Eels were intended to play when they played the Knights. You saw a bit of a scrappier performance against the Tigers. But today against the Storm in the first half, you saw zero. Like, there was zero evidence of anything that they worked on in the pre-season. There is nothing more I can say than that, John. Zero evidence. and you saw the worst version of a number of players.
Oh yeah.
You know, as I said, players who there just wasn't effort. Like there were times where they actually were standing there staring at each other. Now, round one, standing there staring at each other. No. Okay, now we didn't see that so much in the second half. In fact, what I thought we saw in the second half was better line speed, a bit of aggression.
They adjusted all their fundamentals.
Intent.
Like they didn't play,
that's it.
Didn't play amazing football by any means, but they actually got back to the starting line and started like looking like a team that had trained in the preseason.
John, my expectation going into today was that we were going to struggle and we would, and in reality, would probably get beaten by the Storm. However, I felt that if we could stick to the fundamentals, as you just raised then, that's what they did in the second half, that if we competed with fundamentals and just executed those as well as we could, that you'd stay with the Storm, and you know they'd probably have a few too many big guns to defeat down there, but you never know. If you keep in the game, you never know what the result of football is going to be. I honestly believe that we would stay within 18 points of them. I really believe that we would. And to see them score so many points in the first half, and you know, some of it was just atrocious defence. It was
non-existent. You just had
it was not
ball watching.
You know what? I was looking at their missed tackles, and they were only credited with 29. I guess you can't be credited with a missed tackle if you're not actually attempting the tackle.
And there was multiple tries scored. You know, the one that really jumped out initially, and we spoke about it in the green room, was the King try. Where I'm not sure if it was Jack Williams or Jermaine Hopgood, but got their alignment completely wrong and just didn't have an attempt at the tackle. And then same thing in terms of turning attack into defense was when that ball hit the deck when we were on the attack in the first half, and I think it was Kelmer and Isaiah just stared at it. Guys, it's a live football. Dive on it.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. And that's what I'm talking about. Like the number of times the players just sort of stood there and stared at each other, and they're, as you spoke about before, that's fundamentals of football, right? They're not even, you wouldn't even call them effort plays. There may be minor effort plays, like to fall on a loose ball like that. They are such fundamentals, and it was frustrating to see things like that happen in the first half when it's the first half in the first game of the season. That's probably the most disappointing part. The fact, as I said, the fact that
getting out talented by the Melbourne Storm in round one when you're down 7 players, nothing to be embarrassed about. You know, if you're beaten because Ryan Pappenhausen and Xavier Coates get the spot up against Jake Tungle a couple of times, okay, that's fine. But getting beaten the way we did in the first half, that is humiliating. It's humbling, and it
had to be frustrating, John. It had to be frustrating. I mean, the entire first half had to be frustrating for Jason. But when they finally scored a try, and then we turned over the ball with like 30 seconds to go.
Offload to Isaiah,
You know, like,
oh boy, it's just
hands up anyone listening who knew that the Storm were going to score from that scrum.
Everyone in the living room that was watching this game would have turned to their significant other, their family member, their friend, whoever they're watching the game with, to their dog, and would have said, Melbourne are scoring here. Like, you just know Melbourne are scoring here. Sure enough, they break to the left from the scrum. Riley Smith actually does a good job in pursuit, but then there's a channel behind for Ryan Pappenhausen to sneak into, and then the secondary scrum defenders just didn't get there in time, and he just screams in, Pappenhausen's speed, a reminder of why the Eels went after Isaiah Yongi in the free agent market, didn't they? Because he was a difference maker in this game. The first try he scored was an absurd blend of like luck and skill as well, with the ability to get that ball that Volkman had tipped back and get it down. Yes, the Eels copped all the barrels from Melbourne here, mate. And usually at this point, we'd sort of have a very, I wouldn't say a cohesive plan, mate, but we sort of have a structure with the podcast and the instant reaction podcast we go through, but we do have a live chat. So I've been following along while we've been chatting. There's been some good thoughts in there. A lot of love to everyone that's out there. We've got more viewers than I would have thought for a rushed live reaction podcast. But generally, I do like the sentiments I'm seeing, mate. There's been some good criticism. Kelmer's been caught out a few times. He had a very bad game. He actually ended up getting the hook in the first half, mate, and then got thrown back in when Jack Williams was concussed and didn't do himself much of a favour in that second stint. A lot of love going towards the two rookies. I thought they had pretty good games, mate. Riley Smith and Sam Tuivasa. Riley got big minutes at dummy half, actually, and did a great job. We talked about not diving on those loose balls, not hustling. Well, he was one of the few players that did hustle. He tried to trace down Will Warbrick on that intercept try. Put to the point he gave himself cramps. Was scrapping it out in that game. Thought he had a good effort there. And then Big Sam was one of the few forwards that actually put a dent in Melbourne's ruck defence. He actually, gotten pushed backwards and was falling on his belly. So a couple of solid efforts there from the rookies.
Yeah, John, we getting any questions about stats or anything like that? Because I'll be ready for you to hit your stats pretty soon.
We can get the stats up, but just before we get the chat involved, I see a couple of familiar faces in there as well. So it's really nice to have him in there. There's Josh, one of the very good Parramatta fans, both in Discord and on Facebook. Very good student of the game as well. And then I saw...
That's Queensland Josh?
That is Queensland Josh, yep.
G'day, Josh.
And then who else I saw up there before? Obviously, we know Chanel. We gave her a shout-out earlier. And then... Make sure I'm not missing people here, because I did see a familiar name. I have missed someone. So we'll keep going, but thanks to everyone for turning up on the short notice. So we're going to try and make this a regular fixture for the podcast, so you can then catch us live or catch us on replay if it's better suited to you. Oh, Ben. There we go. Ben and Fletcher in chat as well. So thanks to them. People who've been following the podcast will know Ben and Fletch for their own efforts in podcasting as well. Have been an awesome part of the fantastic Parra community. So
the electric cast.
The electric podcast. But yeah, look, I'm seeing really legit criticism of the team here, 60s, which is exactly what you want to see in the wake of a loss. We've always preached that it is good to be critical of the team, even when you win. You need to be vigilant about that sort of thing. You need to be, celebrating the wins, but also, sort of dotting your I's and crossing your T's. And forget about dotting your I's and crossing your T's. We couldn't even get a letter on the page today. So the people are being very good, though. It's criticism that is absolutely fair, rather than being personal and of the nature that we just don't like seeing, not just for Parramatta, but in rugby league in general, mate, because you talk about mental health and whatnot. These athletes are people.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's we understand passion and emotion. It's what drives supporters is their passion and emotion for their team. One of the things about our instant reaction podcast has always been that we're flying by the seat of our pants with this. We're not going into it with a run sheet as such, where we've done this enough times that we know the rough structure that we're going to follow. Although this is new territory, John, with you replying there to the comments that are coming in.
It's kind of analogous to doing live updates. You're sort of trying to have a chat with you or call the game, and then you've got some people on the side giving you some great commentary. Meanwhile, we've got a comment from Chanel, sort of to paraphrase Will Smith. I think she's saying, keep Riley Smith's name out your mouth for good luck there. So,
yeah, of course, what people may or may not be aware of is it's the 60s curse, where if I start praising anyone too much, injury normally strikes. And so she did give me that bit of advice before the podcast started, not to mention Riley. You've mentioned Riley. I'm not allowed to mention him. I'm not allowed to talk about his game or give him any praise, because that will surely send him into the Eels injury list. So I'll leave that to you, John.
Damien asks, mate, do Maddo and Lane come straight back in? I think there's going to be obviously a lot of room to tweak the lineup going into round 2 against the Tigers. The question will be obviously on availability for these players as well. but assuming they are fit, what sort of changes are you expecting to see Jason Rolls make to both the bench and the team in general?
Yeah, look, Lane's an interesting one. He's getting close to being ready now. Whether they put him straight up for selection in NRL or whether they want him to have half a game in New South Wales Cup or something like that before he's up for selection, I'm not sure. Now, the reason for that is he basically hasn't been able to have a pre-season. He's had periods in rehab during the pre-season, and it's just been tough for him. He's been training strongly pretty much since the Eels have been in their trials, but whether he's ready for selection, I don't know. That's up to the Eels to be able to determine. Was he listed as round 2 or round 3?
I believe it was round 2. Let me just use the old powers of the internet and find the Eels injury report. But I do believe, because I had a look earlier today, and I think the only long-term player that was really of note was Bailey Simonson. Where is the injury report? Here we go. We have Sean Lane, knee meniscus, expected round 2. So, yeah, round 2 we get back Hayes Dunster, Dean Hawkins, Sean Lane, and, Richard Pennicini played in the Jersey Flag. But you got Gideon Katonga round 3, Bailey Simonson round 4, and then obviously Mitchell Moses, the big one. We're sort of penciling him in round 6 or 7, right? 60s based on what the club feedback was. But we do not have a firm timeline on that update because he could take to treatment better or could not respond positively to. So we sort of just have to keep that one in the back of our minds.
Well, I can remember people like Nathan Cleary being tipped to be out for like a couple of months and being like a few weeks. I think there might have been. Was there an occasion where he was back in like 1 or 2 weeks when there was this?
There was. When they were sort of talking about like a season-ending injury. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, and
so
I do want to stress 60s. We had players out against Melbourne, no doubt, and clearly Mitchell Moses is our best player and would have made a difference in some aspects of that game. But in the first half, it was boys against men. Like we were out-muscled, out-enthused, outplayed off the park, and Moses, Madison, Lane, it doesn't make a difference who you throw into the mix there. Maybe we save 1 or 2 tries.
Yeah, John, there were too many players who weren't mentally switched on. As I said, my concern was that we were like that in the first half of the first game of the season. I don't know why. And maybe it has to do with some of the players that were unavailable for selection. So there was like eight NRL players and 1 development contract player that were unavailable for selection. Now, there were probably a number of those who might not have been selected, but I had as much concern about those numbers as I did about Mitch Moses being absent. But as you said, that, I don't know if I'll call it a malaise, but that lack of intensity, the lack of communication, the lack of cohesion, the lack of almost everything in that first half was infectious. So maybe it was a malaise, maybe it was a sickness.
But Melbourne are a team that if there's blood in the water, they just go savage, and we saw that. So just to finalise that answer, first of all, if Lane is fit, he comes into contention. It has to, considering the result that we've just had. Matto, well, we don't really know too much about. He dropped out of the line out. And it was news that Sam was making his debut yesterday. So a couple of questions sort of as an addendum to that about the availability of Bryce Cartwright. Should he be available for round 2, mate?
He was available for round 1.
Yep. So
he and Woody weren't selected. So it was as straightforward as that. Yep. They weren't injured. They just weren't selected. So so then that brings me to my next question, John. I don't know because I can't see the questions from my side of things. What do you think about the players that did come in? Because I don't think they let themselves down. Sam Tuivasa, you can mention the dummy half. I'm not allowed to remember.
Yes, Sam Tuivasa and Riley Smith. I thought they were both like, not saying they were superstars on debut, but given the context of this game, they actually rolled their sleeves up and showed a bit of grit and gumption, which is, I think, a good sign for a rookie considering the circumstances. I thought they were both good. Zach Lomax just didn't get any ball you're talking about the wider sort of NRL debutants for Parramatta, or club debutants, sorry. Lomax did what he could. He still got 100 metres on the ground. Just didn't see any ball, and that's probably a function of Mitch not being there. And it must have been a called, like a strategy or a called shot, but Ronnie Volkman was very aggressively kicking early inside the Melbourne Storm quarter, and I don't know if it was always like...
I didn't get it, John. I didn't get that.
It didn't feel like it was what I just said, or Ronnie Volkman's strategy, sorry.
The strategy.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure if you just had a technical...
I didn't get the strategy.
No,
yeah.
I understand kicking early aggressively if the fullback has been lax and you feel like you can punish the back three in that regard, but he was kicking early and it felt like his outside men weren't really sure when he was kicking. So
yeah, that's right. And a couple of them were a little bit, that because they were early in the tackle count, it felt like. Well, maybe Melbourne weren't expecting it, but I don't think the outside...
The Eels weren't,
so that was my concern there. John, I have just a few notes that I took that I wanted to run through. First of all, that first half, one of the things that I noticed was that the Storm were doing Storm things, being like the wrestle, the slow down in the ruck. In contrast... like we were bouncing up off the tackle so quickly.
It's a tale of Zidle's time for Parramatta, and I was hoping that Jason Riles would have been able to take us in a different direction, because that was legitimately one of the biggest criticisms of Brad Arthur's reign.
John, this is the thing. This is what stuns me, is that they've been working on that all through the pre-season, and bang, they're just jumping straight off, and it's obvious that the referee was being extremely lenient with the Storm doing Storm things, and we just, we didn't try to join in that game. We did a little bit in the second half, and I think that was part of that. It allowed us to get that line speed a bit better as well, just slowing up that play of the ball. Look at how quickly that first set, John. The standard was set in the Melbourne Storm's very first possession, when they just were rolling down the pitch, and the Eels were just constantly backpedaling, and it was all coming off really quick play the balls. So
there was no contest, no spoil of the ruck. And on the flip side, I mean, there are times where Melbourne were literally backpacking us. Like we had, I think, 3 or 4 occasions where Lomax or someone had a Melbourne Storm player draped over their back, pulling them back down, and we just couldn't get to play the ball. And the referee's going, it's fine. And then there is what I'm not going to complain about the refereeing, because when you get 46 points put on you in the first half, it is 110% your own fault. But there is one thing I do want to gripe about 60s, and that is the milking call against Harry Grant when he was at dummy half, and he is clearly milking and not touching the ball. And then we're put into a damned if we do, damned if we don't situation where the one time he went and played at the ball, and it was Volkman that did it, and I don't blame him, but he went to pick up the ball because Harry Grant was there for 10 seconds, didn't touch the ball, and the referee's calling milking, and we touch the ball, and it should be a live ball, and we get done for it. And then for the rest of the game, they scored later in that half in a very similar situation where milking was called at dummy half, and it was on our goal line, and we just sort of stood there passively because we got already being put our hands in the frying pan once, got burned. Only an idiot puts it in the second time. And we just sort of stood there at dummy half and said, you know what? Yep, we're not going to touch it. We're not going to move. And they shift the ball to the left, and someone crashed over out wide. If you're calling milking and the dummy half is not touching the ball for 10 seconds because he's, farting around at dummy half and, trying to get a penalty, that ball is live, and the markers can get that ball. Otherwise, you got to call it a different way.
Yeah. Look, I agree with that. But I also think that this is where the Eels have to have some way that they deal with it. If one team's doing it, jump in there
bite the bullet. And if you get penalised, you get penalised. But you you've got to try and compete in the ruck, and we just didn't do that. And that's maybe less of a criticism of Riles because it's only round one, and you're not going out there with knives sharpened for a rookie coach in his first game, no matter how bad the loss is. And again, the chat response has been great about this, and I respect that immensely. And people know that in TCT, we're not going to sit there and put the knives into a coach by any means. But maybe it's a function of just both a combination of the inexperience in the lineup because there was a lot of players out, the transitional window that it is between a new coach coming in and some new players coming into the lineup. It could just be a confluence of a lot of factors. Getting overawed by round one, it's hot. Craig Bellamy was on record from the press there saying that it was the hottest round one in Melbourne he's ever been part of, which is pretty astonishing given that it's been 2.5 decades there. So that sort of adds at least some subtext to the situation. But yeah, that first half you want to pour gasoline over it and light a flame and then just throw it away.
John, first of all, I want to congratulate you on managing to get the word confluence into a rugby league podcast. I doubt that there's too many rugby league podcasts out there where you get a host talking about a confluence of factors. Beautiful stuff, mate. That's all I can say.
Be a word of the day there, yeah.
But yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. It'll be interesting to know what Jason Ryle's takes are. Now, I mean, you're going to get the post-match presser where he's giving some of his opinions, but they're not going to give – any coach isn't going to give everything away at a post-match presser. It'd be interesting what his takes are on what the Eels produced because, yeah, we're just talking about ugly. And, John, that question about who comes back in, who doesn't, I really think that it's interesting because there was a failure of players that a couple of whom you think would be walk-up starts in the first grade. And I was really disappointed in some of those efforts where, especially around the just standing there and looking at the ball or looking at each other. It's just that's probably what disappointed me more because, as I said, I think the young blokes that came in, I can't point the finger at any of them. I can't suggest that any of them failed in what they produced. And let's face it, you're talking about Iongi, the Iceman. This is his second NRL game. Riley Smith, his debut game. Sam Tuivasa, his debut game. There's a collection of them there, I think, as well, that have less than 10 NRL games to their name. So it was very much a team where, in terms of experience, wasn't too dissimilar to the back end of last year.
Yeah.
Like in terms of NRL games experience. I think we had one game where I think the total, it might have been the collection of about 7 or 8 of them had 30-something games experience between them. But anyway, just a couple of things, John. I just wrote down some specifics with some of the tries. I said it was they switched off before that second try.
Yeah, definitely.
That the Storm scored, just looking at each other. We switched off on our own offloads.
Yeah. Yes.
We turned over possession.
There was a sequence where there was 3 offloads that hit the deck in a row.
No one was looking for the offload. I mean, yes, you can question the pass being thrown, but more concerning to me was that there was no one there waiting for that offload. If the offload's thrown, and I mean, it's a bit hard with some of the angles that you get to watch with the coverage.
On the broadcast,
you're not there.
That doesn't tell the full story of second phase availability, but we know for a fact that in the preseason, the Eels train to run in packs, right? To be pushing up and be in support.
Yeah, in support.
Ball playing before a line or opening up those second phase avenues. So
when I said, what was in evidence from what I saw during the preseason, I said nothing.
It looked like the first half they just completely forgot how to play football. Everything they've done the last 3-4 months everything they prepared in the last 2 weeks, like going from the trial to the round one prep period, they were just overawed by the moment. And it's
one of the things that I guess can happen, and I actually had it said to me as well through some smart people who know what they're talking about with the football, that a risk that can happen when you're talking about completely changing systems with players is that when the pressure is applied, they fall out of what's new and go back to what they knew. So, I might be using some homophones there, but that's basically they forget what's new, go back to what they knew.
Big shout out to Colmac in chat, who's just provided an answer to a question we had there about the first half possession splits. Melbourne 54-46 was the end 40-minute possession splits there. So Colmac knows his numbers, and if he says it's 54-46, then it was 54-46.
Yes. So I think we're getting that straight from Champion Data. Mm-hmm. So shout out to Champion Data for their fine stats work. But yeah, so that run from Katoa, that 50-metre run, it was the attempted defence was comical. I mean, first of all, everyone was stopping and watching Munster dance.
Yeah, to skip across 30 metres across field, and then classic Cam Munster stuff. And look, I will say that I thought Will was actually one of our best players on the field in the context of the overall game, but he had a bad miss there against Katoa. And it wasn't his direct assignment because, you talk about that edge alignment of wing centre, back rower, half, or half back rower, depending on how the team sort of set it up. He's obviously marked up against Howarth and not Katoa in a neutral situation, but he was the man that had the chance to shut that down and got it wrong.
And can I now congratulate you, John, for using the word "in the context of," in the appropriate circumstances in talking about something, because one of my greatest bugbears, and this is going off topic, but it annoys me when we get commentators or rugby league pundits in the media as the match is going, saying, "Well, in the context of the match, this is." And
the entire match is
it's
the context
always
there.
Like it is just, it is always in the context. But you actually, when you said in the context of the entire match that Will Penasini was one of the better performers, that is true. That is absolutely the right way of using that word. Now, I hate to be pedantic, but I'd meant to say this in our news podcast where we're just having a chat about this is my bugbear. The people who keep saying in the context.
What grinds 60s gears, yeah.
Yeah, and then when the words "in the context of" started coming out of your mouth, I'm thinking,
the little eye twitch.
Please don't let this be John using it in the wrong context, right? But used in the context of, in the correct context. So as much as I was pleased with you using confluence before.
About to give me a dressing down if I got it wrong on the follow-up there.
Yeah.
We've been going...
hang on, just before we go.
Yeah.
Tungor try. How much of it that was a surprise to you, seeing him actually leave the
if someone was... Look, and Jake Tungor, I think, again, the TCT community are going to be good about it, but he's going to be a player that's going to cop a lot of or misdirected hate, I feel like, in the coming week. He's a bloke that went out there and tried his backside off. But if you would tell me that someone's going to come flying through on the right edge and out-jump Xavier Coates to score a try, it was a 10,000 to 1 that would have been Zach Lomax. And instead, Jake Tungor did a great job getting that inside line to sort of offset that height handicap, and he got a great leap as well. So that was a really nice piece of play from Jake Tungor, and he battled today, 60s, because I don't know what the severity of the arm injury was, but I was concerned he'd ruptured his biceps at one point. You saw the camera pan over to him, and he was in agony, and doing that motion to if I could get my camera to line up there, well, whatever, there, I'm patting the bicep there. It's that sort of really alarming.
The guns, mate. You got the guns.
Guns, yeah. The what is it? Maybe a potato gun. But yeah, seeing him sort of hunched over and clasping at that bicep was real alarm signs, and it contributed to him knocking on a kick at one point. He was clearly not 100% there, but he did a great job to take that try.
Well, mate, I'm not going to show my 64-year-old arms,
I've gotten some great feedback about your looks for being 60s, mate. So you're doing a good. Don't tell Chanel. She might be listening, but there's definitely a pro 60s crowd out there.
She wouldn't care. Look, what I will say about the wingers, seeing as you touched on it with Tungor, that loss. I'm not pointing to our wingers for anything there. We got torn apart through the edges.
Yeah, like anyone that's like looking at Sean Russell, who again, a big shout out to Sean Russell there. Alongside Riley, one of the few players that turned and chased with everything he had on a number of occasions when it was a play on the other side of the field. So that was the sort of effort I wanted to see from more players, frankly. But yeah, the wingers, it's not their fault we lost there. So
now a couple of apart from all what has to be dealt with in the video and improved from that first half, I wanted to touch on just a couple of things from the second half. First of all, we missed, in my opinion, a certain try when Iongi didn't pass to Will Benassini and instead it was intercepted. That was a 12-point turnaround. Now, we had enough 12-point turnarounds last year that we don't want to visit that again. And we had it when Riley's pass went to ground and then people stood and looked at it. And then we also had it with that intercept. Will proved when the ball went to him the next time in almost identical circumstances that
he had Jack Harris'
he gets
number
the ball,
game.
he scores.
Yeah, he obviously the scoreline doesn't point towards it, but he had Jack Harris' number, at least the ball in hand. And Isaiah, it's always tough to be a fullback when your front line's getting holes punched in it left, right, and centre. I thought he actually defended really well on a couple of occasions. He was probably aided by was it Ryan Pappenhausen being incredibly greedy at one point and not passing the Cam Munster. But he didn't get it all right. But considering the greater picture there, I thought he did a lot of good, and that was just when he got wrong there. He should have 100% gone to Will there. And it feels like it is a natural instinct in the modern game to cut out your centre and go to the winger in that situation. But that's why you play eyes-up football, right? You would have seen that Will Warbrick had sort of cheated inside and gotten out of alignment in order to do the one thing he could have done to save that situation. And he'll be Isaiah's going to be better for that. He'll do the tape on that one. And they even made that adjustment, didn't they, 60s later in the game when, like you said, Will went over in a very similar circumstance. So, I think largely positive from Isaiah, all things considering. Will in that first game at left centre, where it can be a much more difficult transition than people will give credit to. You spend either your entire career or most of your career doing everything with an alignment on the right side, which means you're sort of using your left. You align from your left foot and do everything, keyed off that, to doing it to your right side. And it seems very simple, but it's one of those ones that there is a lot more nuance to it than people think. And I think defensively, you'll probably see the most issues there, which is perhaps what we saw, in the first half a bit there. Will was far from the worst defender in that regard, but there was the Katoa break that we talked about. But offensively, he looked dynamic on the left, which will be better and better as Eels actually, get closer to their best football.
Yeah, you realise about some of the nuances of positional play when you see a specialist coach like Mark Gasnier working with the players, and the difference that just a half a metre of positioning makes in both attack and defence. And as you said, whether you're setting yourself off the left foot or the right foot as well, the difference that can make, and how something that's been the way that you position yourself for years and years is suddenly changed. It's there's a bit for you to do to adjust. So, John, maybe what we should get into now is where to from here for next week, because they're facing the Tigers this Sunday. There'll still be no Mitch Moses. There might be a couple of players that are back. There may be some changes to the team that, as a result of the performance, if with players that are back, and I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be players coming in players going out who are brought in for the match, it may well be that there's players who lose their position as a result of their performance. So we don't know what Roz' take will be on this, whether he's a coach who will make immediate changes or whether he gives players a number of weeks to prove themselves.
I think there was at least an inkling that he might be aggressive. 60s. We saw Kelmer pulled from the game initially due to struggles in defense down that right edge. It had to be getting hooked because it was only 14 minutes into the game, and you don't strategically plan for an edge back roller to be rotated at that point. And like we said,
we were being split there.
Yeah, exactly. And
we were having problems right there.
We mentioned in the podcast earlier that he got a chance to redeem himself with the Jack Williams HIA, and he did not do anything to further his case. And if you sort of extrapolate from there, I do think that it is not an unreasonable assumption to make that there could be at least one or two changes.
Look, Kelmer can be such a weapon in attack on the edge.
And the frustrating part is it's not even about the offense, because that comes naturally to a player like Kelmer. Defensively last year, he fell into I suppose buckets or brackets or however you want to phrase it, defensively that were perfectly acceptable alongside other top tier back rowers. I was looking at his effective tackle rate because obviously the feedback from the Tigers trial was he missed 7 tackles, and that's a real concern, and that was incredibly fair from people that were pointing it out. And I sort of went back and had a look, and he was alongside guys like this is always the issue of going live. You have to then think about the things you actually remember. Liam Martin was one of them. From the Roosters, Angus Crichton was another. Hudson Young at the Raiders, all representative caliber or actual active representative players. He was right there within 0.05% defensively. So I wasn't too concerned coming into round one because of that. Someone has a bad game, they have a bad game, but he backed it up, with an absolutely diabolical effort today. And I don't think as a rookie coach you can go in and say, you've let me down 2 weeks in a row. Yeah, one was a trial. I'm going to give you a third chance. I think that now Kelmer has to pay his dues in New South Wales Cup, and I think that he'll be one of the casualties going into round 2.
Okay, so the back line, probably with the players that are not available, because we still won't have Bailey Simons until probably round 4 or 5. The Fox is suspended, so there's not going to be any changes to the wing. There's not going to be any changes to the centres because they're our 2 strike players. There's not going to be changes to fullback. Dylan's still going to be there at 5'8". If Dean Hawkins is available, he actually has to come in.
Yeah, that's
because we wouldn't have exemption for Ronald. Even if Ronald Volkman had played a blinder and had steered the Eels to victory, we wouldn't have been able to select him if Dean Hawkins was available next week, because he's in because Dean Hawkins isn't available, and we don't have anyone else within the top 30 who is fit and able to play in the halves. So the Eels probably would have had to upgrade him to be able to select him the following week. So if Dean Hawkins is fit, he comes in for Ronald.
That's non-negotiable. Like, that's just how it is.
Yep. You're calling the change in the pack with Kelmer. You think it won't even be a matter of going back to the interchange, that he will spend time in Cup as a result of this game. Do we then have what's Gideon's prognosis? Is he back?
Round 3 was the official report from the club, and the injury nature was a ankle, not specified. So I suppose that could be maybe a positive response to the treatment. Could see him in the frame for round 2. We do play, what are we, Sunday 60s?
Yes, we're Sunday.
So
we should mention that we are back in Parramatta Leagues Club with our podcast on Sunday. Actually, we've still got to clarify whether we're pre-game or post-game, but we will be back there during at the home of the Eels in the 2025 season. So shout out to Parramatta Leagues Club there. Look, John, I don't know whether we're going to have Gideon back. Like you said, it's round 3. I'll therefore say he's not available. So who would your starting back rowers be? Would you keep the starting front row the same?
Yeah, look, Junior and Joe were non-factors, and I think, especially with Junior, you probably expect more with the offensive production. I think the numbers are pretty rough for him, but they probably have the benefit of seniority and just not coming into a game script where we're getting absolutely waylaid at every facet of the game. So I would expect them to maybe stay that way. I would probably look to put Charlie Guymer on that edge to replace Kelmer, since that's pretty much what happened in this game. Jack Williams stays on the left. You'd keep Hopgood at lock forward, although I thought he was a little bit off the pace this game. So you're just hoping that he gets a bit better after having a game under his belt. And then on the interchange, Brendan Hands, however you want to line them up, whether Brendan starts or Riley starts. I thought Matt Dury was fine. He came on the second half and had a couple of nice runs, and defensively, we weren't as porous when he was on the field alongside a few other players, so that's fine. I would keep Sam in the mix. I feel like that sort of game should be rewarded. Although if there's more bigger macro things that Riles need to do that would facilitate him having to be 18th man, I could understand, but I feel like Sam earned his place there. Which leaves me with one spot. I don't know. It's tough, isn't it?
If Luca's fit.
So, yeah, Guymer goes into the starting team. So you've got Guymer there. You've dropped Kelmer. You got one spot there.
I think Luca. If Luca
makes sense if he's fit. I think that's a no-brainer. I don't know. It's tough to have the answers, mate. I think you start Guymer on the edge, Williams on the edge, so there's that. You could look at someone like Tony Mattelli if you feel like you want to bring a bit more energy into that front row rotation. I see Josh was talking about that in chat as well, and I don't think that's a bad shout-out.
But that's I think where Luca also comes in terms of bringing that energy into the rotation. Yeah, we know he's a high-energy player. He could even be part of the mix to start if Riles wants to mix up either Joe or Junior back to the interchange.
You could be forced into making a backline change if Jake Tungwall is hurt. I did see earlier Colmack mentioned that Richard Pennicity came out of that flag game dusty, so he won't be available next week. So that's another consideration. That means Arthur Miller-Stevens there, who's eligible without any restrictions. Hayes Dunst is scheduled to come back. He's in the top 30, so he'll be available. It's tough, mate, when you've got so many players either banged up or coming back with question marks. See, Ben mentions Jordan Samrani, and I would love to see Samrani there, but we need dispensation, right, 60s?
Yes, with Jordan we would. Look, people might want to throw Joash into the mix there.
Joash is a name I saw pop up in our chat as well, and I love the idea of Joash. The problem is that we just got completely out-muscled off the ball by the Melbourne Storm, and you can talk about the Tigers being a different kettle of fish, but you got to be very careful with your bench balance when you start talking about throwing in another small body.
Absolutely.
And that's no knock on Joash. There will be configurations or permutations of Parramatta's lineup where he should be there, but it's just right now we need to get back to the fundamentals. And Samrani is a guy that actually prototypes really nicely there, but I'm just going to look, and we've spoken about this in the past 60s. The NRL signings portal is deviously inconsistent with whether the guys are actually top 30 or dev. Sorry about that Windows noise. That's me not being able to spell Parramatta on the search function. That was a Parramatta with no A after the M.
Yeah, look, Jordan is he's train and trial this year. Yeah. He's top 30
he gets upgraded next year, but that would need to then facilitate another either upgraded development player and then put him dev or put him straight into top 30. So that's all they got to produce the argument of all time to convince the NRL that he is the only player that can play in the back line. And yeah, Josh is right. Riley Smith does not deserve to lose his spot. The only thing that should keep Riley out of his spot next week is if those what looked to be cramps in the game aren't cramps. So hopefully that was just cramps. And given what he put himself through physically, I'm not surprised he was cramping up in both legs. So there's options. And if Ryan Madison's back, that obviously helps the big picture too. That's a sort of player that would have helped a lot today. I know that Maddo can have his moments defensively, but he's absolutely the sort of person that can give you a bit of traction in the ruck with the ball in hand. So
yeah.
There's options. There's options. It's going to be tough for Rolls, though, mate.
Oh, look, absolutely. And as I said, to me, he's got a bit to sort out around the edge because...
Oh, yeah, the fragility of our edges, I saw Colmack talking about it earlier. Melbourne had clearly identified that as their big game plan through the week, and they just went after us.
Yeah. So, okay, mate. Well, that just about brings us to the end of our first live instant reaction. So thank you to everyone who's tuned in to listen to this live. Of course, you'll be able to access it when it's not live as well. And
on all the major platforms. And we'll think about a structure for this to make sure that everyone that's chatting is involved. Maybe we'll, moving forward, 60s, we can look at maybe doing a bit of a, not scripted, but off our sort of usual structure, and then open up the floor to chat to sort of steer conversation.
Well, look, I think maybe what we could do is have a dedicated part of each podcast that's Q&A.
Yep, I think that's
which will be a good way that we can go with the instant reaction, and then even you and I have been talking about going live with our other podcasts. You're obviously reading some of the comments.
We've had some great banter and chat while you've been talking about the podcast, mate, and people have given me some fantastic ideas for little intermission cards for our news podcast to embrace some memes about who we look like.
Oh no,
it's been quality banter. I love
it. Yeah, we do have some people that are well known to us who won't be shy in making suggestions. So,
all right, let's put a bow on things, mate. Not the result. Got to make sure I don't trip over my tongue here. Not the round one result anyone was looking for. Obviously, the Eels just outclassed massively by Melbourne. There were some signs in the second half that suggest that, while yes, the whole 50-point curse is on us now, and you can't expect us to win the title if you subscribe to the old school wives' tales like that. But we dug in a little bit, and there was a little bit of character in the second half. And I'm not going to be crowing about it and saying we won the second half like Andrew Voss kept trying to shout out, and Vossy just let it go there, mate. But it's such a backhand way of commentary to Parramatta fans. But they did dig in, and the rookie showed a little bit. The new guys showed plenty. And I think Jason Riles is going to have a bit of a discovery session with the boys, and we move on against the Tigers in our first home game of the season. Yeah, and of course we'll see you there. We'll see you in the news podcast, next week's preview, and of course at Parramatta Leagues Club next week. Thank you, John. Thank you to everyone to tune in. Thank you to Greg and the team at Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta for their continued support. Thank you to Para Leagues for continuing to provide us with the venue to bring you our podcast in person on match days.